The sound of the binder slamming shut echoed through the conference room like a gunshot. Everyone flinched. I stood there frozen, watching Martin Caldwell close the proposal I'd spent 4 months creating. The proposal that could have changed everything for our company. The proposal that represented countless sleepless nights and sacrificed weekends with my family. "You're a strategist, Chris, not a visionary," Martin said, his voice cold and precise. "Leave innovation to people who actually understand it." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. 8 people sitting around that polished table, and not one of them met my eyes. They just stared at their laptops or shuffled papers, pretending they hadn't just witnessed my professional execution. My hands gripped the edge of the presentation stand so hard my knuckles turned white. I could feel heat flooding my face, that burning sensation that comes when humiliation hits you in front of people you've worked alongside for years. 4 months of research, financial projections, market analysis, prototype development, all dismissed in 3 sentences. Martin leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. He was enjoying this. The younger executive with the expensive suits and empty resume, crushing the veteran who'd actually built this company from the ground up. That was the moment I realized loyalty meant nothing here anymore. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. My name is Chris Halden. I'm 42 years old, and I've given Zentratec 21 years of my life. 21 years of building systems, solving problems, and creating solutions that turned a struggling startup into a legitimate player in the software industry. I joined this company fresh out of college when it was just 12 people working out of a converted warehouse. Back then, we believed in something. We thought hard work mattered, that dedication would be rewarded, that if you contributed real value, you'd be recognized for it. I was naive. Zentratec grew over those 2 decades. We moved into proper offices, hired hundreds of employees, landed major contracts. I grew with it, climbing from junior analyst to senior product strategist. I helped design the systems that made us profitable. I trained new hires who became department heads. I worked through holidays and weekends, missing my daughter's recitals and my son's baseball games because I believed this company was worth the sacrifice. Then Martin Caldwell arrived 3 years ago. Young, ambitious, perfectly groomed, with an MBA from a school that mattered more than actual experience. He knew how to talk to executives, how to make promises sound like guarantees, how to take credit for other people's work and make it look natural. Within 6 months, he was director of strategy. My director. Martin became my boss after stealing credit for a client retention system I designed. The system saved Zentratec 3 major accounts that were threatening to leave. I'd spent 8 months developing it, working directly with the clients, understanding their pain points, building custom solutions. When the board asked who'd saved those accounts, Martin stepped forward. He presented my work as a collaborative team effort under his strategic leadership. HR called it proper management. I called it theft. But I stayed quiet. I told myself to play the long game, that the truth would eventually surface, that good work would speak for itself. I was wrong about that too. Martin started reshuffling teams immediately after his promotion. People who'd worked with me for years were moved to different departments. His favorites, young professionals who dressed like him and laughed at his jokes, got promoted into key positions. I watched the company I'd helped build get reorganized around a man who understood politics better than product development. Slowly, systematically, I was being edged out of important projects. Meetings I used to lead were suddenly handled by Martin's protégés. Emails I used to be copied on stopped arriving. My name disappeared from project documents. I was becoming invisible in the company I'd spent 2 decades building. The idea came to me late one night 6 months ago. I was reviewing analytics from our enterprise software suite, looking at usage patterns and client feedback, when I noticed something everyone else had missed. There was a gap in how our system handled data integration, a fundamental flaw that limited scalability for larger clients. But more importantly, I saw how to fix it. Better than fix it, I saw how to revolutionize it. I spent the next 3 months building a complete blueprint. A new analytics engine that could integrate across multiple platforms, process data 3 times faster than our current system, and scale infinitely for enterprise clients. The financial projections were staggering. This could generate $1.8 million in new revenue in the first year alone, possibly tripling that in year 2. I worked in secret, using my personal time and equipment. I built working prototypes, ran stress tests, compiled market research showing exactly which clients would adopt this immediately. I created financial models demonstrating return on investment. I prepared every possible question the board might ask. This wasn't just a proposal. It was my redemption. My proof that I still had value, that age and experience meant something, that loyalty and dedication could still matter in this new corporate culture Martin had created. I was going to present it directly to the board and show everyone what real innovation looked like. I made one critical mistake. I showed it to Martin first. Professional courtesy, I told myself. He was my direct supervisor. Going over his head would create problems. So I scheduled a private meeting, walked into his office with my proposal binder, and laid out the entire concept. Martin listened, nodding occasionally, asking a few questions. When I finished, he smiled and said, "This is really interesting work, Chris. Give me a few days to review the details. I want to make sure we present this properly to the board." I should have known better. I should have recognized that smile, the same one he'd worn when he took credit for my retention system. But I was excited, optimistic, believing that work this good couldn't be ignored or stolen. A week later, Martin sent me a meeting invitation. Strategic planning session, board attendance required. I walked into that conference room expecting to present my proposal. Instead, I found my slides already on the screen. My financial projections. My market analysis. My prototype demonstrations. Every single element I'd created, displayed for the entire board with one crucial difference. Martin's name was listed as primary author. Mine appeared in small text at the bottom under, contributing team members. He was already standing at the front of the room when I entered, explaining my concept with words I'd written, using slides I'd designed, taking credit for months of my work. I sat through the entire presentation in stunned silence. Martin moved through my slides with practiced confidence, explaining the analytics engine like he'd built it himself. The board members nodded approvingly, asking questions he answered using my research. When the presentation ended, I waited while the executives congratulated him. Then, as the room emptied, I followed him back to his office. "You used my work," I said, keeping my voice steady. Martin closed his office door and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "It's the company's property, Chris. You were paid to think. I just filtered your ideas into something the board could actually understand and use." The words hit me like a physical blow. Filtered. Like my months of work were raw, unrefined materials that needed his polish to become valuable. "I created every element of that proposal," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "The concept, the research, the prototype, the financial projections. You didn't contribute anything except your name on the cover page." Martin's expression hardened. "You've been here a long time, Chris. Maybe too long. You're excellent at technical work, but you don't understand how business really operates. Ideas are cheap. What matters is knowing how to position them, who to present them to, how to frame the narrative. That's the skill you lack." He moved behind his desk and sat down, a clear dismissal. "Consider this a learning opportunity. Watch how I handle the implementation, and maybe you'll understand why I'm in this office and you're not." I left without another word. But as I walked back to my desk, my hands were shaking with something beyond anger. Something colder and more dangerous. Within a week, word spread through the office that I was losing touch with the company's direction. I started noticing subtle changes in how people interacted with me. Junior analysts who used to ask for my guidance found reasons to work with Martin's team instead. Meeting invitations became less frequent. Project assignments shifted to other strategists. Martin was poisoning my reputation systematically. In hallway conversations and team meetings, he'd make casual comments about old-school thinking and adapting to new methodologies. He never mentioned my name directly, but everyone knew who he meant. Chris has a lot of institutional knowledge, he told the team during one strategy session. His tone making institutional knowledge sound like a polite term for obsolete. But we need fresh perspectives to compete in today's market. I watched my career crumbling in real time. People I'd mentored, systems I'd built, projects I'd led, all of it was being reassigned or reimagined under Martin's new direction. The company I'd helped create was erasing me piece by piece. I went home each night feeling hollow. My wife noticed I was quieter during dinner, distracted when our kids talked about school. I couldn't explain it to them without sounding bitter or defeated. How do you tell your family that 21 years of loyalty meant nothing? That all your sacrifices and missed moments were for a company that saw you as disposable? One evening, about 3 weeks after Martin stole my proposal, I was packing up to leave when someone knocked on my cubicle wall. Erin Walsh, a junior analyst I'd trained 2 years ago, stood there looking uncomfortable. "Chris, do you have a minute?" she asked quietly. We walked to an empty conference room. Erin closed the door and turned to face me, her expression troubled. "I saw your name on the original draft," she said. "Before Martin changed it. I was helping compile board materials, and I saw the file properties. You created that entire proposal. Every slide, every calculation. Martin just changed the author name and presented it as his own." I nodded slowly. "I know. That's not right," Erin said, her voice rising with indignation. "You should report it to HR. That's intellectual property theft." I smiled weakly. "It's fine, Erin. Don't worry about it." But it wasn't fine. And her words stayed with me as I drove home that night. For the first time since Martin took my work, someone else had acknowledged what really happened. Someone else had seen the truth. That's when something fundamental shifted inside me. I realized that silence wasn't dignity anymore. It wasn't patience or professionalism. It was surrender. And I was done surrendering. I spent the next month working in secret. Using my personal computer at home, I rebuilt my proposal from scratch. I took the original concept and refined it, fixing every minor flaw, strengthening every projection, adding new data that made the business case even more compelling. Martin's version, the one he'd presented to the board, was incomplete. He'd taken my work but didn't understand it well enough to implement it properly. I knew where the gaps were because I'd built the original. Now I was creating something even better, bulletproof, undeniable, ready for deployment. I worked late into the night after my family went to bed, the blue glow of my monitor lighting my home office while I perfected calculations and ran simulations. This time, the proposal was mine completely. My name, my work, my vision. No one could take it from me because no one else would see it until I was ready. My plan was simple. I'd bypass Martin entirely and present directly to the CEO. I'd request a private meeting, lay out my complete proposal, and show him exactly what his company was missing under Martin's leadership. It was a risk. Going over your boss's head was a career-killing move in most organizations. But I had nothing left to lose. Martin had already destroyed my reputation and stolen my work. The worst the CEO could do was fire me, and at that point, it almost felt like freedom. I scheduled the presentation for a Friday morning. The CEO's assistant confirmed the meeting. I prepared my materials, rehearsed my delivery, and arrived at work that Thursday night to print the final copies of my proposal. When I logged into the shared drive where I'd saved my backup files, they were gone. Every version, every draft, every supporting document I'd kept on the company server had been deleted. The folders were empty except for one file, a text document that read, "Files removed per policy compliance review." My heart hammered against my ribs. I checked my email backups. Corrupted. The automated backup system I'd relied on for years had mysteriously failed, and every cloud copy of my work from the past 6 months was inaccessible. I sat at my desk in the dark office, staring at error messages on my screen, and felt something close to panic rising in my chest. The presentation was tomorrow morning. The CEO was expecting a revolutionary proposal, and I had nothing to show him except corrupted files and empty folders. Then I remembered. Martin had requested access to my project files 2 weeks ago, claiming he wanted to review my methodology for a training presentation. I'd given him my login credentials. Standard procedure for managers reviewing employee work. He'd used my own access to destroy my backup files. I barely slept that night. At 5 in the morning, I gave up trying and drove to the office. I had one option left: recreate enough of the proposal from memory to at least demonstrate the concept to the CEO. It wouldn't be perfect, but it might be enough to get his attention. When I arrived, Martin was already there. I found him in his office, and through his glass door, I could see my proposal binder sitting on his desk. The only remaining hard copy of my complete work. He'd taken it from my locked drawer, probably using a master key or convincing facilities he needed access for some official reason. I didn't confront him. There was no point. Instead, I went to my meeting with the CEO carrying nothing but a legal pad with hand-drawn charts and notes I'd compiled overnight. The CEO listened politely for about 15 minutes before his assistant interrupted to say Martin needed to speak with him urgently. When the CEO stepped out, Martin entered with my binder in his hands. "I apologize for the confusion," Martin said smoothly. "Chris and I have been collaborating on a strategic initiative, but I think there's been some miscommunication about presentation readiness." The CEO looked between us, clearly annoyed at having his time wasted. "Get your team aligned and reschedule when you have something concrete." The meeting ended. Martin walked out with my proposal under his arm. That afternoon, Martin announced a company-wide presentation for the following Monday. Unveiling our new strategic direction, the calendar invitation read. I wasn't listed as a presenter. I was listed as a supporting team member who might be called on to provide technical details if needed. I went home that Friday afternoon and sat in my dark living room while my family was out. 21 years of loyalty, and this was what it bought me. Public humiliation, stolen work, a reputation in ruins, and a boss who was about to present my life's best work as his own vision for the company's future. I sat there in the darkness for hours, my phone buzzing with messages I didn't read, my mind circling through the same thoughts again and again. There was no justice here. No fairness. No reward for doing things right. Martin had won because he understood that in corporate America, stealing was legal as long as you stole from the right people in the right way. That's when I whispered to myself in the empty room, I'm done. Not done being angry. Not done feeling betrayed. Done playing by rules that only applied to people like me while people like Martin operated without consequences. If the system wouldn't give me justice, I'd create my own. Over the weekend, I started documenting everything. Every email exchange with Martin. Every file I'd created with timestamps showing authorship. Every deleted document I could recover from local backups. Every conversation I could remember and date with witnesses who could confirm what really happened. I compiled it into a comprehensive timeline, irrefutable proof that Martin had systematically stolen my work, destroyed evidence, and sabotaged my career. It was clean, professional, and devastating. But I didn't send it to HR. I didn't schedule a meeting with the CEO. Because I'd learned something important over the past few months, proving you're right doesn't matter if the company doesn't care. Instead, I started researching Zentrateka's competitors. Specifically, Vortec Dynamics, our biggest rival. They'd lost a major contract to us 2 years ago because of a client retention system I'd designed. They'd tried to recruit me back then, offering a salary increase and better benefits, but I'd turned them down out of loyalty. That loyalty seemed absurd now. I drafted an email to Vortec's Chief Innovation Officer. Short, cryptic, designed to spark curiosity. What if I told you I could double your market reach in under a year? I stared at that email for an hour before hitting send. This was the point of no return. Once I contacted a competitor, there was no coming back from it. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from my wife asking what I wanted for dinner. I looked at her message, thought about my kids, about the years I'd missed with them while building someone else's company. I hit send. The response came within 3 hours. Vortec's Chief Innovation Officer, Catherine Torres, wanted to meet. Monday morning. Private location. She didn't ask what I had or why I was reaching out, she just said yes. I spent Sunday refining my proposal, rebuilding it completely from my home backups. This version was even better than what I'd shown Martin. I'd had time to think, to improve, to perfect. I added new market analysis, updated financial projections, and included implementation timelines that were aggressive but achievable. Monday morning, I called in sick to Zentratec. Then I drove to a cafe 40 miles outside the city where no one from either company would recognize me. Catherine arrived with 2 other Vortec executives. They sat down across from me, and I could see the curiosity in their eyes mixed with skepticism. They probably thought this was a waste of time, that I was just a disgruntled employee with complaints and no substance. I opened my laptop and began presenting. Within 5 minutes, their expressions changed. Within 10, they were taking notes. By the end of my 30-minute pitch, they were looking at each other with the kind of excitement that comes from recognizing a game-changing opportunity. "This is extraordinary work," Catherine said quietly. "This could genuinely revolutionize our analytics capabilities." "How much are you asking?" I'd rehearsed this moment in my head a dozen times. $3.6 million. Full implementation rights. And complete control over the project development. They didn't even hesitate. Catherine looked at her colleagues, received slight nods from both, and turned back to me. "We'll need to verify everything you've shown us, conduct due diligence, have our legal team review the intellectual property issues. But assuming this checks out, and I believe it will, you have a deal." She extended her hand across the table. I shook it, feeling something strange settle over me. Not triumph exactly. Not even satisfaction. Just a quiet certainty that I'd finally stop letting other people define my value. "One more thing," Catherine said as they prepared to leave. "We'd want you to join Vortec as Director of Strategic Innovation. Lead the implementation team. Build your vision the way it's meant to be built." Director. The position I'd deserved at Zentratec. The recognition I'd earned through 2 decades of loyalty. Being offered to me by the competition because my own company was too blind to see what they had. "I accept," I said. We spent the next hour discussing logistics, timelines, and contractual details. Vortec's lawyers would draw up agreements. I'd need to give Zentratec 2 weeks' notice. The deal would remain confidential until after my departure to avoid any legal complications. As I drove home that afternoon, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of trying to prove myself to people who'd never valued me was gone. I was done begging for scraps from a company that saw me as disposable. I returned to Zentratec Tuesday morning and played my part perfectly. I attended Martin's big presentation where he unveiled his new strategic initiative, the watered-down version of my proposal that he'd cobbled together without understanding the underlying technology. I sat in the back row and watched him stumble through explanations of concepts he didn't fully grasp. When executives asked technical questions, Martin deflected with corporate jargon, promising detailed follow-up reports he'd clearly need someone else to write. The CEO looked mildly impressed but not excited. The board members took polite notes. It was clear that Martin's presentation lacked the depth and vision of what I'd created. He'd stolen my work but couldn't steal my understanding of it. After the meeting, Martin actually approached me. "Chris, I'm going to need you to prepare detailed technical documentation for the implementation phase. Full specifications, deployment timeline, testing protocols. I need it by Friday." He wanted me to fill in all the gaps he'd created by stealing work he didn't understand. He wanted me to save him from his own incompetence. I smiled and nodded. "Of course. I'll get started on that right away." I had no intention of preparing anything. In 2 weeks, I'd be gone, and Martin would be left holding a proposal he couldn't implement. My final 2 weeks at Zentratec were surreal. I went through the motions of my job while secretly coordinating with Vortec's legal team. We structured the deal carefully. Everything I was selling to Vortec was work I'd created on my own time, using my own equipment, after Martin had already stolen and claimed my original proposal. Legally, Zentratec had no rights to my improved version. Martin's theft had actually protected me. When he'd put his name on my work and claimed it as his own, he'd severed my legal obligation to the company. The proposal he'd stolen belonged to Zentratec now. But the superior version I'd created afterward belonged to me. I watched Martin struggle through that week. He kept asking for the technical documentation I'd promised, which I kept delaying with various excuses. He grew increasingly frustrated as the CEO pressed him for implementation details he couldn't provide. On my last Friday at Zentratec, I submitted my resignation letter. Professional, brief, thanking the company for the opportunity. I didn't mention Martin. I didn't list grievances. I just ended my 21-year relationship with 1 page of polite corporate language. Martin called me into his office within minutes of receiving my resignation. "This is very sudden, Chris. Is there something we can discuss? A counteroffer we can make?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no desire for confrontation. He was just a man who'd chosen shortcuts over substance, and that choice would catch up with him soon enough. "No counteroffer needed," I said. "I've found a better opportunity." My first official day at Vortec was a Monday. Catherine gave me a corner office with windows overlooking the city and a team of 6 talented engineers who'd be working under my direction. By Wednesday, we'd begun initial development on the analytics engine. By Friday, Vortec's PR team was ready to make the announcement. They'd coordinated it perfectly, press release timed for maximum impact, scheduled for Monday morning when the markets opened. I spent that weekend with my family. Actually present, actually engaged, not distracted by work anxiety or career disappointments. My wife noticed the change immediately. "You seem different," she said Saturday night after the kids were in bed. "Lighter somehow." "I am," I said. And I meant it. Monday morning, Vortec's press release went live. Vortec Dynamics unveils revolutionary analytics platform, industry-leading integration technology set to transform enterprise software market. The announcement included technical details of my system, implementation timeline, and client testimonials from beta testers. It was comprehensive, professional, and undeniably superior to anything Zentratec had announced. My phone started buzzing within minutes. Former colleagues texting questions. Industry contacts asking if this was really my work. And one call I didn't answer, from Zentratec's main office line. I let it go to voicemail and focused on my work. The fallout at Zentratec was immediate and devastating. Their biggest clients started calling, confused and concerned. They'd been promised revolutionary analytics capabilities based on Martin's presentation. Now their competitor was delivering something far superior. Catherine kept me updated throughout the week. 3 of Zentratecha's major accounts have reached out to us for demos. They're concerned about investing in outdated technology when we have something better. Zentratecha's stock price dropped 4% in 2 days. Industry analysts were questioning why the company had missed such an obvious technological opportunity. Some reporters who'd covered Martin's original announcement were now writing follow-up pieces suggesting Zentratecha's leadership was out of touch with market demands. By Thursday, the board called an emergency meeting. I heard about it through Aaron, who texted me, "Martin's been locked in meetings with executives all day. People are panicking. What did you do?" I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I hadn't destroyed Martin, I just stopped protecting him from his own incompetence. On Friday afternoon, Catherine forwarded me an industry newsletter. The headline read, Zentratech Director of Strategy Martin Caldwell placed on administrative leave pending internal review. I stared at that headline for a long time, expecting to feel something. Victory, maybe. Satisfaction. But all I felt was tired. The investigation moved quickly. Zentratecha's legal team reviewed every file Martin had claimed as his own work. They checked timestamps, authorship data, email trails. Everything led back to one conclusion: Martin had systematically stolen work from multiple team members, with my proposal being the most valuable and most recent theft. The board discovered that Martin's strategic leadership over the past 3 years consisted almost entirely of rebranding other people's work as his own. My retention system. My analytics proposal. Projects by other senior strategists that had mysteriously become Martin's achievements. Within 2 weeks of my departure, Martin was terminated. Not quietly resigned. Not reassigned. Terminated, with cause, which meant no severance package and a permanent mark on his professional reputation. Several former colleagues reached out to me during this time. Some apologized for staying silent when Martin undermined me. Others wanted to congratulate me on my success at Vortec. A few asked if Vortec was hiring. I was professional with all of them but didn't engage deeply. They'd made their choices when it mattered. They'd watched Martin destroy my reputation and said nothing. Their regret now didn't change what they'd allowed to happen then. The only person I stayed in contact with was Erin. She'd been the one voice who'd spoken up, who'd seen the truth and acknowledged it. When Vortec opened a new analyst position, I made sure she got an interview. 3 months into my new role at Vortec, I was leading a team of 12 engineers and analysts. We'd successfully launched the analytics platform, and early adoption rates exceeded projections by 30%. Major enterprise clients were migrating from competitors, including several former Zentratech accounts. Catherine called me into her office one morning. "Chris, I wanted to show you something." She pulled up a financial report on her monitor. "Your analytics platform generated $4.2 million in new revenue this quarter. We're projecting $8 million by year-end. Your work has fundamentally changed our market position." She paused, studying my face. "How does it feel? Getting recognition for what you actually built?" I thought about that question for a moment. Honestly, it feels normal. Like this is how it should have always been. "That's because you understand your own value now," Catherine said. "You're not waiting for someone else to validate your worth. You know what you're capable of, regardless of who's watching." She was right. The anger I'd carried for months had faded completely. I didn't think about Martin anymore. I didn't check Zentratecha's stock price or read news about their struggles. That chapter was closed, and I'd moved on to something better. The revenge I'd wanted in those dark moments after Martin's betrayal had transformed into something quieter and more satisfying. Success. Peace. Purpose. One evening, about 4 months after I left Zentratech, I was working late in my office when my desk phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Chris? It's Martin." I hadn't heard his voice since my last day at Zentratech. It sounded different now, smaller, uncertain, missing the arrogant confidence that used to drip from every word. "Martin," I said neutrally. I wanted to talk. To apologize, maybe. I know what I did was wrong. I was thinking maybe we could meet for coffee, discuss what happened, see if there's any way to. I ended the call mid-sentence. Just pressed the button and disconnected. I didn't block his number. I didn't call him back. I didn't feel angry or vindictive. I simply had nothing to say to him. He'd made his choices, and those choices had consequences. That wasn't my responsibility to fix or forgive. My phone buzzed a few minutes later with a text from the same number, "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you know that." I deleted the message without responding and went back to work. 6 months after joining Vortec, I was featured in a business technology magazine. "The Strategist Who Transformed Enterprise Analytics" was the headline. The article detailed my career, the development of the analytics platform, and Vortec's market success. The reporter asked about my time at Zentratec. I could have destroyed Martin completely in that interview. I could have detailed his theft, his sabotage, his systematic destruction of my career. The reporter would have loved that story: corporate betrayal, stolen innovation, dramatic revenge. Instead, I said, sometimes when a door slams in your face, it's because you're meant to build your own house. Zentratec gave me valuable experience, but Vortec gave me the opportunity to fully realize my vision. I'm grateful for where I am now. The article ran with that quote as the pull quote highlight. My phone exploded with messages from former colleagues, industry contacts, and former Zentratec executives who read between the lines. My wife framed the magazine cover and hung it in my home office. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not for the success, but for how you handled it. You didn't become bitter. You just became better." That night, my kids asked about the magazine article. I explained it simply: sometimes people treat you unfairly. When that happens, you have two choices: waste energy being angry, or invest that energy in proving your worth somewhere else. My daughter thought about that. "So you chose to be worth something?" Exactly. A year after leaving Zentratec, I drove past their old headquarters on my way to a client meeting. The building looked smaller than I remembered. The logo was still there, but the parking lot was half empty. The company had downsized significantly after losing major contracts to Vortec and other competitors. I pulled into the parking lot for a moment, looking at the building where I'd spent 21 years of my life. All those late nights. All those sacrifices. All that misplaced loyalty. I felt nothing. No bitterness. No regret. No satisfaction from their decline. It was just a building where I used to work, filled with people I used to know, running a company that had chosen mediocrity over substance. Their success or failure was no longer my concern. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, then put the car in drive and left. I had a client presentation to deliver, a team meeting to lead, and a family dinner to make it home for on time. The past was past. I'd learned what I needed to learn from it, about loyalty, about value, about standing up for my own worth instead of waiting for someone else to recognize it. People often ask me if what I did to Martin was revenge. They want the story to be about destruction, about bringing down someone who wronged me. But that's not what happened. Martin destroyed himself. I just stopped being his safety net. When you steal work you don't understand, eventually someone asks a question you can't answer. When you build a career on other people's accomplishments, eventually you're left holding achievements you can't replicate. Martin's downfall was inevitable. I just accelerated the timeline by removing myself from his support system. The truth is, revenge isn't about tearing someone else down. It's about building yourself up so high that what they did to you becomes irrelevant. It's about proving your worth not to them, but to yourself. My boss rejected my $1.8 million proposal. So I sold it to a competitor for double. Not because I wanted to hurt him. Because I finally understood that my work had value regardless of whether he recognized it. Today, I walk into Vortex offices every morning and lead a team that respects my expertise. I create solutions that change how companies operate. I make decisions that shape markets. And when I go home at night, I'm actually present with my family instead of distracted by corporate politics and career anxiety. That's not revenge. That's justice. That's peace. That's knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it ever again. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't destroying your enemy. It's building something so successful that they become irrelevant to your story. And that's exactly what I did.